Buenos días, bon dia. Good morning to everyone joining us today. On behalf of the UNESCO Regional Office in Santiago and the UNESCO International Institute for Educational Planning, we warmly welcome you to the forum final open minute of our 2025 cycle, Digital Talent for Educational Transformation and Innovation. This initiative is developed within the framework of the UNESCO Regional Alliance for Educational Transformation and Innovation, which we call ARTIE. And this is a space that brings together ministries of education, but also expert academic networks and international organizations to provide strategies supporting quality education and inclusive education goals. Remember that you can hear in your own language, so you can switch the interpretation channel to English, Spanish, and Portuguese right at the bottom in the Zoom. Now, let me briefly review the path we traveled together. In our first meeting, we established a common regional diagnosis on challenges and opportunities of digital transformation in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in our second meetings, we went through governance, leadership, and capacity development as fundamental pillars. In our third and last meeting, we explore materials and pedagogical foundations like infrastructure, connectivity, and digital pedagogical solutions. And today, we close this open webinar cycle by addressing topics that are critical for our digital policies to be sustainable and effective. We talk about long-term financing, educational data management, and ethics in digital environments shaped by artificial intelligence. But before introducing today's panel, I want to share an important development. In response to requests, and now we are going to see in our screen a video, in response to requests from educational ministry officials related to AI in education, and within the framework of the Regional Alliance, we have developed a preliminary AI assessment tool for education system. This is a web-based platform grounded in UNESCO's RAM methodology, the 6 pillars for digital transformation, and the IA and the Education Guide for Policymakers, and also the Regional Teacher Competency Framework. It allows to evaluate 3 critical dimensions: governance and ethics, infrastructure and capacity, and pedagogical integration and equity. And what makes probably this tool unique are 3 key features. First, it provides immediate diagnosis report with actionable roadmaps, identifying strengths, gap, and priority next step. Second, it integrates AI power analysis, generating customized prompts and briefing documents that policymakers can use to develop contextualized recommendation and implementation strategy. And third, it offers regional comparative insight, allowing countries to benchmark their progress against aggregated regional data while maintaining anonymity, foster mutual learning and thought-solve cooperation. We are making this tool today openly available. It's in Spanish and English. And while it is a preliminary version that will evolve based on UNESCO new framework that are underway, it represents a concrete step in AA and education policy planning across our region. You will find a link to the tool in the chat, and you will need to register if you don't have an account in order to access the tool. But why is educational planning so important? Because in our region, we have witnessed a recurrent and problematic cycle, significant investment in educational technology that, due to lack of sustainable financial planning, end up being discontinued with government changes. We've seen programs that fail to consolidate as state policies, limiting the possibility of deep and lasting transformation. So that's why we have today this great panel with expert voices offering complementary perspective on strategic planning, data management, education financing, and artificial intelligence in education. With this purpose, I hand over to my colleague Amparo Naranjo, who will introduce the specific challenges we'll address today and our panel dynamics. Amparo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. I'm going to switch over to Spanish. Before I jump right in, and for those of us who are here for the very first time, I'd like to stress that this regional course and seminar with IIEP is part of the Regional Alliance for Educational Change that comes from the educational cooperation and solidarity between the countries. And it's the main point of this initiative to address the challenges of inclusive education and quality in our region. This regional alliance is a network of networks that meets the concrete needs of the countries in the region to push and drive innovation in a sustainable manner based on evidence. We're looking to strengthen the ministry's different skills and strengthen our teachers and strengthen the culture of innovation and collaboration that allows us to accelerate transformation in our educational systems in a context that is marked by deep inequalities and difficulty to ensure quality education in Latin America and the Caribbean. Digital transformation is a critical importance. It's not like an option, it's a necessary condition. So the question that we're all asking is not, should we include them, but how to do it strategically, ethically, and deeply focused on impertinence and equality, including teachers and students at the center of this ecosystem without losing sight of the fact that education is a relation-based experience. Before we start, we also wanted to share with you an opportunity that's very important and very interesting that UNESCO and CEVAL are offering on December 11th and 12th in Montevideo, Uruguay. It's a regional seminar for Latin America and the Caribbean, empowering teachers and students with AI competencies. This is an event which is part of the South-South cooperation, which is promoted by UNESCO and the Group of 77 plus China. It will bring together policymakers, educators, experts to work on UNESCO's AI competency frameworks for teachers and for students. It is a concrete opportunity to translate these frameworks into relevant curricular policies and actions in our region. We invite you all to participate, and you can find more information regarding this event on the virtual campus. As Fernando mentioned, we will talk about 3 things that are absolutely interdependent: sustainability, financing, and data. Regarding planning, these are absolutely critical, and if we don't look at them in a comprehensive manner, it will become our Achilles heel for digital education. We know that most digital policies in our region are not planned as true state plans, which tend to be very short cycles. This has led to a lack of continuity with changes in government, with lack of funding, and has led to short cycles that are often very frustrating when it comes to applying digital policies. Educational technologies are often purchased without considering long-term costs, maintenance costs, and so on and so forth. In addition, we are facing a critical gap in educational data. Only 54% of countries have actually implemented unique student identifiers, and many of our information systems are simply not interoperable. So how can we make informed decisions if we do not have quality data? And this, together with artificial intelligence, is changing the landscape. It brings us extraordinary opportunities, but it also presents significant risks, including algorithms that can reproduce inequality, systems that have low transparency, and complex ethical challenges related to data privacy, just to name a few. To address all of these complexities, we are joined by 4 expert voices in this event. Shafika Isaacs, Chief of Section for Technology and AI Education in UNESCO, will give us a global perspective of how AI is transforming education and the frameworks that are needed to anticipate these changes. We are also joined by Martín Benavides, Global Director of IEEP UNESCO, who will help us understand how to build truly sustainable and resilient policies that move beyond the cycle of investment and then abandonment. It is also an honor to welcome Ana Laura Martinez Tesoro, Regional Coordinator of Technical Cooperation at CETIC, Brazil. She will share emblematic regional projects, including its survey, one of the strongest initiatives to analyze technology access, use, and adoption in schools, and including cutting-edge AI research. Also joining us today is Ursula Perez, Associate Professor at the University of São Paulo, who will help us reflect on how to ensure financial and operational sustainability for educational policies that are linked to digital transformation. The conversation, as you know, will be structured to enable dialogue across our panelists' perspectives. Each intervention is 5 minutes long, followed by a reaction by one other panelist, 2 minutes, and finally, the first person to speak will then have 2 minutes for closing remarks. So, Fernando, I give the floor back to you, and welcome once again to everyone here.
And Shafika, we begin with you with this global perspective that is fundamental to framing in our entire conversation today. From your leadership at UNESCO, you have a unique perspective on how AI could contribute to education globally. We know that AI offers a lot of opportunity, but also significant risk. Algorithms that can deepen inequality, opaque systems, and challenges related to data privacy, especially of minors. And looking ahead, what future-oriented policy frameworks and strategy do we need so that AI in education truly contributes to better education system? How can countries anticipate and prepare for this transformation? Shafika, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Fernando, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all the colleagues who are present in this conversation. I think that you are certainly posing a really profound, thought-provoking question. And at UNESCO, our approach has evolved towards becoming a lot more reflective, a lot more reflexive, engaging more critically with what is becoming increasingly complex questions. And so we are veering away from trying to be instrumentalist with having ready-made answers, but to engage more with the complexity that sits beneath a lot of the issues that we are grappling with in terms of AI in education. And so as to your question, it does push us to look beyond the dominant narratives and discourses that is shaping the way we think and the way we talk about and the way we make decisions about not just AI, but emerging technologies more broadly. And so often when we speak about the future of AI in education, we treat it as a neutral technological destination we are all heading towards. And we are increasingly appreciating that this is a misconception, that the future is not a neutral place that we arrive at, that it is in fact a contested space, and that we actively build and are often on top of building these futures on top of deep pre-existing inequalities. And so we are learning, as has been the key focus at our Digital Learning Week and our publication on AI and the future of education, that the way we think and talk about AI cannot just be about managing AI's opportunities and risks. We think that that perhaps poses the issues in too much of a binary way, and that we've got to surface the deeper complexities. And so it must be about how these technologies interact with and are shaped by our complex social, political, and cultural fabric of our education systems, including our TVET systems. So they're not just framed as tools, they are also institutions designed and embedded in history, in power dynamics, in people's lived identities. And so that framing is quite important for us in this conversation. So given this understanding, we are appreciating a number of shifts in our narratives and policy cultures that require three critical and key orientations. Firstly, we understand now that we've been very proud about being very principle-centered in our stance as UNESCO. You know, we are principled about promoting education as a public good, talking about ethical, equitable, inclusive, socially just technologies in education. But we've also learned that principles alone are not enough. We must also cultivate a culture of participatory, sense-making, dialogue, and action. And that means we actively involve the very people who are experiencing the vulnerability and the exclusion, the students, the educators, the communities, in the design and the governance processes of these systems. So, for example, in the TVET space, this is especially critical as these systems are interfacing regularly and quite dynamically with a precarious gig economy. Policies and practices that are designed and developed with people and with communities, not just for them, are the only ways that we can really engage with pathways and bridges to equity and inclusion. And so that it's not divorced from these very integral participatory processes. So that's the first thing. The second is that we now learn that we must connect better and make better connections between micro and macro level policy and practice. Our policies will need to focus on building capacity at every level, from the TVET classroom and workshop to the institution and across the entire system. And that demands a far greater appreciation of participatory approaches that give concrete expression to the lives of the very people involved. So we see that there are powerful examples in the Latin America and the Caribbean region where such locally led approaches are making meaningful progress. So that kind of participatory approach to policy making and policy practice is becoming far more critical now that we have these technologies entering our systems. And then thirdly, we've also learned that we must foster far greater symbiotic ecosystems that, while being deeply sensitive to local and institutional contexts, we must work better at also reconciling and learning within and across institutions, and also look at systems in ways that are more relevant and generalizable across systems, also at the meta level. So we have seen during COVID how national policies on zero rating educational resources have created enabling macro environments. And so that interrelationship and symbiotic relationship between macro and micro, we need to be far more conscious about building those linkages. And so finally, I just want to say that for us, context is our architecture, and we've got to ground our experiences far more in history, in presence, not just as we look to the future, and center those more on contextual realities, so that it becomes more participatory, and in that way only can we build bridges towards equitable futures with technologies that we design, develop, and create on our terms. And that is some of the lessons that we're learning in the approaches and the conversations that we are having at UNESCO from a global perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here today. I wanted to thank you for this invitation on behalf of the UNESCO, and it's so wonderful to be here. Shafika said things that were absolutely critical when we connected to the issue of financial sustainability of this project. If we consider that this investment in digital education and in artificial intelligence needs to be connected to education, because this is no longer something we can consider an option, it's a requirement, but it needs to be inclusive, participatory, and equal. But each of these contexts requires time and logic, financial logic for this investment. We have different financial, government, and budget arrangements in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this context is important as long as each of these countries understands that inclusive and equal education is a pillar. So regardless, it's a federal or central government, whatever it is, this needs to be a pillar for every one of the countries. Given this pillar, or based on this pillar, building out credit and loans will be based on local contexts. In a lot of countries, you need funding from the central government for such an investment, but in other countries, resources come from local sources, so it'll change depending on the arrangement. But we need one basic pillar wherever it is. This is an investment, not just in infrastructure or buying software or equipment. It's primarily the training of teachers, the technical training of these teachers so that they can use this equipment, so that they can dialogue with students who are often already thinking about the digital elements of things even before they're in the school. And if this training is not adequate, we won't be able to have proper education for everybody.
Now I will give you the floor again to Shafika. You can comment on Ursula's comments or make a closure of your log.
Sure. Thank you, Fernando. I think Ursula's highlighted a very crucial concept, which I've interpreted as the value and the need for us to rethink our social investment logic when we think of financial investment, because it's not just about money. It is money in the context of a social investment into a social system. And for too long, technological procurement has been the bedrock of the way we think about financing technological investment, that it is procurement-centered and often solutions, so-called solutions-driven, in search of solutions in search of a problem approach. And that has led historically to incalculable wastage. We know many examples where there have been so much money spent on technological investment without taking into account a whole host of social, cultural, linguistic factors and often political factors that inform the technological investment and how that will be used educationally. And so that forces us then to reconsider how we think of technological investment. We reconsider questions of costs, that it's not just isolated costs on the technologies, but now there are increasingly social costs and there are environmental costs and there are trade-offs that if we end up spending more on AI and technologies, that is sometimes at the risk of investing in teachers, and that there's an opportunity cost of investing in human capability and human teachers, and that it's often seen as a trade-off. And so I do think I agree with Ursula that it demands a revisitation of the way we think of our financial modeling strategies and frameworks when we think of investing in technologies financially in our education systems, and that we consider more the underlying values and social investment that informs our financial considerations. Thank you.
Thank you, Shafika. We are closing this block 1, and we are now moving to block 2. I will give the floor to Amparo, who is going to moderate the second block. Amparo.
Thank you, Fernando. And to start this second block, Martín Benavides, Global Director of IIP UNESCO. Martín, let's keep to a deep dive into a topic that's been recurring in our region, and you know it very well. Since your leadership as IEP, we have seen a problematic cycle, heavy investments in educational technology, but with a lack of strategic and sustainable planning, they don't complete their life cycles. There's high rotation and problems with financing and funding. Most of digital policies are not state policies. Okay. And these investments require money, not just like what we heard, but they need strategic and intersectoral coordination, a good modeling and planning that considers the entire life cycle of technology. So my question is, how can we build educational policy in the era of artificial intelligence that are truly sustainable and long-lasting, that transcend political cycles? What are the important and indispensable elements for avoiding abandonment? The floor is yours. Thank you so much, Amparo, and good afternoon, everyone. Perhaps good evening. And I see we have a number of participants today. I hope you're all doing well. And all of you who are with me on the panel. This is a really intense question, just like the last one. Latin America has been very excited, very enthusiastic with digital innovation. The responses have been rather diverse, but in recent years, we've seen that most cases, not all, most cases, that this excitement has accompanied a cancellation or abandonment of these initiatives. So the question is, how can we harness this digital enthusiasm and excitement in a context and make it sustainable? And I think there are 4 concrete things that can help. Number 1, is we see that there's a lot of excitement surrounding wherever technology serves a pedagogical purpose. And this is part of what a pedagogical ecosystem, a teaching ecosystem. It's not a hidden system or private initiative using this methodology. Now, it's not a question of whether we should use the technology or not, or artificial intelligence or not. That's almost a moot point. There's no doubt about that. But the question is, how can we do this smartly and coherently with an educational project that truly serves everyone? So this first element, concrete element, relates to sustainability. Point 2, these initiatives build up institutional memory and ongoing education through intervention and change and transformation. Data, knowledge is not lost when governments change. And all of the assessments or monitoring could be used to improve the programs. There have been cases in Latin America where the assessments have different results, or what we've learned hasn't improved after digital intervention. And in some context, what happened was the program was then improved. It was better aligned to the pedagogical project or focus. And then when there was sustainable pedagogical ecosystem, that was the result. And in other cases, other countries, the project was canceled. And they had to go back and start all over with a new innovation, something different. So it is very important that this institutional memory be built, these messages and ongoing education be built up, that recognizes that reform takes time. It's not something that happens from one day to the next, and they can be changed over time. At IEP, we are always promoting this. We are promoting constantly adapting to the context in which these programs are being implemented. So that would be my second point. My third point to ensure sustainability is you can't do this without skills, training, preparing teachers, not just teachers, but planners, managers who can implement this technology and use this technology with an educational purpose, as I mentioned before. And finally, which was already mentioned in the earlier statements, digital initiatives are always running close to the private sector. They bring a lot of these innovations to market. So there is a real demand to look at these investments with governance that promotes integrity. And these purchasing processes, procurement processes, need to be carried out in a way that the country can see is trustworthy and is not entirely overrun by something oblique and private. So governance that promotes integrity is also critical for the sustainability of these initiatives. Artificial intelligence is our ally. It is a new technological instrument for these new educational policies, not so new educational policies. They help for measuring. They help planners anticipate what's coming down the road and help us anticipate something more permanently and understand the context where we're coming from. And they can help us anticipate what the risks are, where teachers are needed, and so on, and to anticipate crises or environmental problems political. In other words, it's important that we strengthen, that we anticipate, optimize, and learn. And the important thing is that they can help us as if they are an ethical governance structure is in place, ethical and trustworthy governance structure is in place. Their true potential rests on the possibility of using this for public service so that it serves us and serves the greater society. Now we need to understand, we need to link this to clear objectives at every step of the way. Thank you so much, Martin, for this really comprehensive overview of planning and sustainability. We wanted to invite Shafika to respond to Martin's statement.
Shafika, the floor is yours.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. I think, as you've correctly said, Amparo Martinez offered quite a comprehensive insight on a very critical question. And to add to that, I think that what comes to mind, based also on the experiences that we've had, and since our focus is on the TVET ecosystems, we know that what has tended to ensure some vestige of sustainability in our TVET systems is when we focus attention on strengthening our TVET institutions at the institutional level. And so building strong institutional capable leaders in institutions is also a critical success factor. And we know from experience that where that has been a focus, so building the human capability, the human capable leadership capability at institutional level is a critical stepping stone towards building more resilient and sustainable systems within the TVET sector. I think that's an important dimension. The other is that we also know, again, focusing attention on building human capacity and human capability, because in our engagement with AI, as UNESCO, we focus attention on human agency, individual and collective agency, and human-centeredness. And in doing so, the investment has to shift more on the human side of the socio-technical ecosystem in TVET. And so, along with building strong institutional leadership, that is an important sustainability success factor. There's also value in looking at the more micro and meso level parts of the ecosystem that tends to be sustained beyond political cycles, political cycles. So those sections of our systems that tend to stick around for longer. And that's often at the more meso and micro levels, at the level of districts. And we've seen examples of how those investments in our social and human dimensions in the engagements with AI is perhaps the way to go when we think of aspects of sustainability. So I wanted to just highlight those two aspects related to what Martin has indicated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shafika, for this important reflection.
And I wanted to call Martin back if he could just respond to what Shafika just said. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shafika. Actually, I think we can bring this all into one single idea. In the era of artificial intelligence, sustainability starts with governance, not terminology. And governance means training institutions, so that they can absorb all the information, generate learnings, have trained, skilled people in these settings, retain the ability to ensure systems that are integral and that promote assessments with tools that are based on learnings and not so much on sanctions. Basically, all of this is important governance, which would be the first step for necessary sustainability, and then effectively to bring it all together with these technological innovations, and in this case, linking them to artificial intelligence. So thank you so much, Martin. And that is the end of block 2. I now like to hand it back to Fernando for block 3. Fernando? Thank you so much, Amparo. Now we go to Ana Laura. Through your work at CETIC BR, coordinating regional technical cooperation, you have a unique perspective on the region's most robust data initiatives. The TIC Education Survey, which was conducted in 2010 to investigate access, use of, engagement with technologies in public and private schools in Brazil. It's really interesting. The survey generates critical indicators on infrastructure, on connectivity, system, platform use, but also regionally, we face really significant challenge. Only 54% of countries have implemented unique student identifiers. Lots of systems are certainly not interoperable. So the real question is, what are the critical elements that we need to strengthen our educational information systems so that they truly become robust tools for planning and evidence-based decision-making? And what lessons can you give us from the TIC Education Survey and from all of your cooperation work regarding, or that could inspire us regarding quality, coverage, interoperability, and effective data use? Thank you so much, Fernando. And thank you for the invitation. First off, it is such a pleasure to be in part of this panel and to talk about some of the learning, some of the lessons, and working with all of these countries in the region. First off, since 2010, we have been monitoring digital transformation in Brazil through the TIC Education Survey, which was already mentioned. And more recently, we've done complementary studies, which is carried out actually in a number of countries in the region. So I chose just a few main points to share how these studies offer a great evidence basis to assess teachers, schools, students in this age of digitalization, not just in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of pedagogical uses, safety, data safety, and so on and so forth. Data security. Most recent surveys show that connectivity has increased. It's basically all schools have access to internet in Brazil. Nevertheless, if you go down a little deeper, the quality of that connection and the bandwidth and the spaces in the schools where they have connectivity available to schools, there are still limitations for teaching in Brazil. That's what we call significant connectivity. And it's a really interesting concept, and you can see this in the study. Basically, we took all these dimensions, connectivity, place, how many can actually connect? 95, 96, most of them can connect. But how many actually have significant connectivity? And it's much, much less. In general, the population, it means only about 22% of people. The other 80% really are not connected in any significant manner. So this is very important for us, that shows us the gaps that are extremely pronounced in rural urban areas. and in Brazil, between the north and the south. So you can see these big gaps. We disaggregated the data that allowed us to stop generalizing and to start doing a deep dive into what Shafika talked about, contextualizing. Through these national robust surveys, we can get a much better idea of what these differences and inequalities actually look like throughout Brazil. More than just connection, with data management, it's still very, very unequal. A lot of teams work with unupdated systems, fragmented systems. It's very difficult to monitor the public policies in a comprehensive manner. But beyond just that, studies show something that it's really important. It's important to look at the data by region, socioeconomic data through different ethnic groups, etc. And digital inclusion is not just related to infrastructure, as we've already heard. It's about strategic understanding, training, and skills. Just an example, in 2024, less than half of the teachers felt safe integrating or using digital technology in their classrooms. And only 1/3 in Brazil, and 1/3 had not yet received specific training on how to use these technologies. And they had to ask their colleagues. So this clearly shows that schools and cities and states that invest in teacher training, focused teacher training, get more solid, robust results. And you see this in the studies. And studies also show that more creative, and you get more creative results in learning. On the other extreme, we have more recent data from the very recent survey, shows that generative IA is part of children and teens' day-to-day lives. We show that 65% of children and teens from 9 to 16 years old use generative IA. 60% use it to study, 40% to look for information, 21% to create content, and 10% said they use it to talk about personal problems or their emotions. Okay, I know that I only have 5 minutes, but I just want to reflect on something really quickly. We need a data ecosystem that are strong, trustworthy, and accessible to all interested parties, specifically to governments, policymakers, and civil society, in order to have data governance so that we can effectively use these data to monitor public policy that allow us to lead to greater learning and greater equality. Thank you so much, Ana Laura. We'd now like to invite Martín Benavides to react. Thank you so much. That was really important, Ana Laura. The data you shared were really important. And how do we do it so that these information systems that are being generated translate into administratable data that are part of the data systems used by ministries to effectively learn from the data and then ensure better interventions based on this data? There's a real direct connection between data management and planning in this regard. And I would ask, how can we integrate these data regarding students and teachers into administrative systems, and at the same time, processes that would allow us to design or improve public policy regarding digital education systems. It was a real challenge to get all of this information into one 5-minute speech, but I will try. So something that's clear. You need to involve all interested parties right from the beginning. It has to be multi-sectorial and anyone who wants to take part right from the beginning. One single sector cannot solve everything. We know that that doesn't work. The systemic logic has to change there. And that's the same for producing a more data-based ecosystem in general. For constitutional continuity, there are legal frameworks that promote greater probability of longer lasting policies, and these data need to be used beyond different cycles, and they need to be designed to be long-term data and as part of the sustained funding. Promoting interoperability and in this educational system and other data systems can be collectivity, infrastructure, whatever, teacher training needs to happen so that true planning can be comprehensive. And finally, strengthening our analytical capacity. We need to take this data and introduce them into public cycles of clear sectors. So all this a full feedback loop. We know that data are only useful if people know how to process them, use them, and apply them in public policy. And the systems are only as good as the people who use them. So the real possibility of working with training key actors so that they can use this data properly. Now, this kind of exists already in many countries. They can use data for budgets, for monitoring, for assessments, monitoring what's already happened and what could potentially happen in the future. And for educational systems in national strategies, long term. This is critical. I don't have more time, but just I wanted to stress that public policy depends on building these ecosystems, and they need to be interoperable, that serve as decision-making tools on behalf of all key people and beyond the electoral cycles. Please reach out to us at satip.br or tik.br. We're happy to help you with all the data. We're available to give you any data, support you with technical support to gather all this data. And we can support you so that you can also carry out these studies in your countries. You can find the TIC survey online, education survey online. And we're also happy to help you build right-up policy. Thank you so much, Ana Laura. This can inspire lots and lots of jobs in over 33 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this was really valuable. Thank you so much, Ana Laura, Martin, for these great reflections. Really impressive. And we're going to go for our final block. I'd like to hand the floor over to Amparo. So this is final block for financing or funding and sustainability. We'd like to call up Ursula. Ursula, we're going to end our journey with an absolutely critical topic that you know deeply through your experience with political economy, with budgeting and educational financing. How can you ensure financial and operational sustainability of digital education policies? The recurring problem in our region is that technologies are acquired without considering long-term costs, not just purchase price, but all of the implementation and operation and maintenance costs, updates costs, training, staff training, and eventual renewal expenses through the life cycle. In addition, we need to think about diversified financial models that go beyond public budgeting, but that can ensure that the state maintains its leadership role. So my question is, what are the financing strategies and models that can ensure the long-term operational and financial sustainability of digital education policies? What diversified financing mechanisms are most effective for ensuring that these policies become true state policies and are not interrupted or abandoned by changes in government or lack of budget? Thank you so much. 5 minutes. Thank you for the question. This is really an important question, one that ensures financial stability, funding stability. And I really wanted to use this time to talk about 6 important points. Other people have mentioned to think about sustainability, we need to start with governance, the governance of the model. Because establishing governance that involves not just the public sector, but also the private sector and the different areas of the public sector in which transversability of this investment in digital investment is taken into consideration. This investment is not just education. It reflects on quality of life, health, and it reflects in a number of other areas. So all of these different authorities and areas need to ensure or earmark funding for this. So a multi-institutional governance would be the first pillar of sustainable funding. Now, this means institutionalizing this process, and this institutionalization could use a main plan. We have a national educational plan. In Brazil, a lot of other countries also have this, and this needs to be one of the objectives, one of the plans involving this question. So institutionalized planning. 2 is integrated public budgeting. This also needs to be included, and it needs to be the long-term budgeting. So beyond one administration, involving not just investment, which is one part of the issue, but maintenance of the process. And that means something very important, that training and information be permanent. Once training is a permanent aspect, staff training for education and other areas that are involved, this will ensure sustainability because teachers, managers, technicians with this training can pressure the government for ongoing continuous policies. And it's also a dialogue with students, ongoing dialogue with students that involves families, students, that money that has been earmarked specifically for a specific school, how this creates a reflection of this governance in the school to think about the school as a space for broader societal investment. So training people, involving students in the entire school community means participation of civil society that will insist that the government properly use this investment and use this, and each school will insist on that money. And this is absolutely critical in Brazil because 35% of the equipment of the schools have proper infrastructure to broaden digital education. What this means is that we need not just to ensure these funding spaces for these schools that are not structured, but sustainability of these areas where we need, but for this, we need ongoing education. There will always be changes, and you need to ensure that this, that it can confront, in fact, the private lobby that's always going to push for change out with the government. Number 3, control is absolutely critical. Control from UNESCO and companies and other organizations. So pushing the government to say, have you done this? Have you complied with this? Have you following up on these plans and policies. As part of this ongoing dialogue with civil society, the private sector can play a role, not just supplying the technology, but also follow up and monitor how much this technological discussion and funding is actually being coherent with what we're doing with other equipment in the public sector. Is it compatible in the different countries that are involved in Latin America? And I'm going to end right there so that I don't go over time like I did last time. You actually had a few seconds. But that was really interesting. Thank you so much, Ursula. And now I'd like to invite Ana Laura Martinez to comment on what Ursula just said. Laura, thank you so much. Once again, I loved it. How you talked about these different points that we've been discussing from different angles, trying to bring value to the participation of different interested parties, civil society, business sector, and so on, and how we can promote people responsibility and based on different sectors requiring and claiming for responsibility, saying who's doing what and monitoring what's going on. And this is absolutely critical. I think this is absolutely interesting because the key actor are public actors, civil society, but the entire ecosystem, it's all critical for sustainability, for transparency, for being responsible, and for being able to see the outcome, the return on these investments. I wanted to end a question for an audience. How do these educational information systems support decision makers in assessing the ROI? Because we know that the resource and funds are limited, scarce, and we can improve efficiency in our spending. So how can we measure that return on investment? That's a really important question. How can we ensure return on investment? Data integration needs to be really strong. We have governments from different levels, different schools, different areas, and they have one big database, and they've got the results in another database. It's critical that we unify these data with the school census and information from these surveys so that we know what we've actually used from the investments, how much we've actually used it out of this investment, what has actually been delivered in terms of infrastructure and training and technological change in the schools, so that society can then make this assessment and can monitor this return on investment. Prior to this integration, we need to have a planning, a matrix where this investment will take place. And once we integrate this financial, physical, and budgetary data, we'll be able to establish a results model to assess deliverables. And then we'll be able to monitor that over time. So this is absolutely critical. And I'd like to say that in Brazil, we have specific funds, they're earmarked for education, and they can be set aside so that part of it can be for technological investments. The recent law includes a percentage just for this. In fact, this monitoring is even more important in this case because we're earmarking money specifically for this. And these results, what results were generated from this? What has been the return on these investments so that we can establish new objectives and make progress and not just simply waste money or spend money willy-nilly. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ana Laura, Ursula. These are really integral, really important, and show just how these topics are so critical for today's seminar. And I'd like to pass the floor back to Fernando so that we just can go to the closing. Yes, effectively, we have reached the end of this extraordinary panel that brings this 2025 of open meetings. We are deeply grateful to Shafika, to Martin, to Ana Laura, and to Ursula for sharing their perspectives and experiences. The core ideas are clear. Artificial intelligence, AI offers transformative opportunities, but only if it's framed with policies that ensure equity, transparency, protection of rights, people in the center. Shafika said, uncertain scenarios of the future about resilience and sustainability. We perhaps need to think about how we can break this cycle of investment and abandonment through long-term strategic planning. We can have this state policy vision and, of course, robust governance frameworks. When it comes to data management, we confirm the need for strong information systems and that they need to complete or complement other systems. We needed quality data, just like Ana Laura mentioned. Systemic surveys like the TIC education survey are absolutely critical for evidence-based planning. And when it comes to financing, Ursula just mentioned this, we need to consider those long-term costs, the diversified financing models, and ensure that investments are operationally and financially truly sustainable. Perhaps the most important thing is how these different dimensions are interconnected. The challenges in the region are enormous, but there are true, real opportunities there. We are here to think about policies. And part of this webinar and all of the people here is to think about this. We have representatives from over 35 countries as part of this ARTIE, are looking for new and better public policies. And this is a space for you to reflect. And we hope that this has helped you enrich and imagine, think out public policy for sustainable education. Thank you so much, Fernando. I also wanted to thank the entire wonderful panel that we had here today. We are now coming to the end of our 2025 cycle. I also would like to thank all of the participants, 335 of you. We were at 360 participants in 1 hour with topics that were, of course, very complex. So for us, this is very motivational, encouraging, and it gives us the encouragement to continue working together at IPA and to continue thinking about these very important topics for our region. These synchronous meetings have been an incredible journey for the 6 pillars of digital education transformation. It has been comprehensive. We've been able to look at the big context. We've been able to draw it down to our region. And with this material, as Fernando said, we have important projects that we're following up throughout the regional course. So this entire dynamic really encourages us, and we are committed to continue working together in 2026. We'd like to remind you that the course materials are shared, all the resources, and they're all on the virtual campus. For the diploma participants, we are now going to continue to a closed workshop session. The next meeting will be the presentation of these final projects. which Fernando and I have already mentioned, and that will take place on December 17th. And it's only for those who are the diploma participants. To all other attendees, colleagues, thank you all so much for your participation. We'll see each other again in 2026. Merry Christmas a little bit early. And welcome, Happy New Year a little bit early also. And for the diploma participants, we will continue working together more before the end of the year. Once again, thank you so much to this wonderful panel here with us today, and have a wonderful afternoon, all of you here. We have a 2-minute pause, and then we'll come back with just the diploma students. Once again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone on our panel.